this morning, we do have new CNN reporting on what Fox boss Lachlan Murdoch is saying privately about Donald Trump. CNN senior media reporter Oliver Darcy broke this story. Oliver, so what is he saying privately?
Yeah, in private, you wouldn't expect Lachlan Murdoch, the CEO of Fox, to be a Trump critic, but apparently he is denouncing or has denounced the former president in fairly harsh terms this year. I'm told by sources that he has even gone as far as to say, John, that if the president were to, or the former president were to run again for that office, that he believes it would be damaging to the country. Now, that said, Lachlan Murdoch in private has also stressed that the Fox News audience still remains largely supportive of the former president. So I think he knows that he might have his own personal feelings regarding Trump, but that the Fox audience, if the channel were to overtly become critical of the former president, they might dump the channel and flee somewhere else. And we've seen that in the past, after the 2020 election, and a sizable number of viewers left Fox for those other right-wing channels. And even more recently, when the channel carries the the January 6 hearings, a significant number of the audience turns off Fox News and goes somewhere else or just stops watching television. So there are those data points that would indicate if the channel did change its tone on Trump, it would be a very bad business decision. But Lachlan Murdoch in private seems to be pretty critical of the former president.
Any sense he would go public with his feelings?
Very unlikely, I would imagine. I don't think he would probably prefer his private thoughts, even right now, about the former president to, be disclosed publicly, because he runs a channel that is so pro-Trump. Even, recently, in the past week, we've seen how far some commentators will go to support the former president with regard to this FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. So, I can't imagine a world in which he would want to be publicly seen as a Trump critic.
Oliver Darcy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Republican allies of former President Trump are reportedly urging him to speed up his timeline for an announcement on a 2024 presidential bid, with the search at Mar-a-Lago the key factor changing their minds. Several sources tell CNN the group includes some Republicans who previously advised Trump to wait until after the midterms. Joining us now is CNN anchor Chris Wallace, the host of Who's Talking to Chris Wallace. Chris, it's so great to have you here, as always. What do you think about this speeding up of a timeline and the fact that there are Republicans now kind of moving to support Trump that maybe wouldn't have been so vociferous about it before?
Yeah, look, at least at this point, it's kind of a rally around the flag, in this case, the Trump flag. Having said that, there are an awful lot of people inside the Republican Party who have always thought it would be a bad idea for Trump to announce he's running again before the midterms. And interestingly enough, one of the few people who yesterday, even after the raid, or the search, I should say, said, I think that we shouldn't do it, is Ronna McDaniel, who's the chair of the Republican National Committee. She said, let's focus on the playoffs before we, before we worry about the Super Bowl. And I think there are really two reasons. One, if Trump were to announce tomorrow that he's running for president, a lot of money that might go to Republican candidates for the midterms instead might go to the Trump 2024 presidential campaign, in addition to which he immediately soaks up a lot of the oxygen, and instead of those Republican candidates for the House, the Senate, governor, all the way down, being able to focus on Joe Biden and inflation and crime and all of those issues, they're all going to be asked, what do you think about Donald Trump? What do you think about the raid? And the smart Republicans I talk to think that isn't what they should be focusing on in the less than 100 days left before the midterms.